Developing right now, growing opposition as the Pentagon announces it will consider releasing detainees from Guantanamo Bay. Under the plan, dozens of potentially dangerous terrorist suspects will get parole-style hearings, essentially. Well, including a suspected al-Qaeda planner who led investigators to high-level terrorist leaders, an Indonesian who is allegedly responsible for that 2002 Bali bombing that killed more than 200 people, including 7 Americans, and a Saudi who is suspected of attempting to take part in the 9/11 attacks. Michelle Malkin is a columnist and Fox News contributor and joins us now. Your initial reaction to this report, Michelle?
Shannon, I think it's very troublesome and chilling, because I think in any context of talking about Gitmo and the Obama political circus around it, you have to think about the R word, recidivism, and the fact that almost 30% of the detainees who've been released since the opening of Gitmo have gone back and re-engaged in Islamic jihad and combat against American civilians and American soldiers. There's a shadow looming, and it's one of those unspoken things that you never hear about in Washington. The fact that Abu Kumu Sufyan, who was a detainee who was released under the Bush administration under an agreement with Libya, is considered the main suspect and plotter in the Benghazi murders and massacre, and is free to this day. Why don't we ever hear politicians talk about that in the context of the maneuvering that's going on in the Obama administration, not only to close Gitmo, but to possibly transfer these detainees on U.S. soil?
Well, and I want to share a little bit of what we got from the Defense Secretary's office. This comes from a public affairs representative who said essentially these periodic review boards, as ordered by the president, will exist to determine if conditions are now such that we believe the threat posed by the detainee who's there sitting before the board can be sufficiently mitigated such that the U.S. no longer must detain him. How do we do that?
Yeah, good question. And I think given the track record of jihadi recidivism among Gitmo detainees, the American people have to greet any promise that this kind of board or any other new layer of bureaucracy that the Obama administration is going to create is actually capable of making that kind of assessment.
Well, and of course, we all know that the president, or very early on, pledged to have Guantanamo Bay closed down. So do you think that this is just another step in trying to make sure that that happens? Because there are detainees that this administration says could be released, but that Congress is fighting them, and so they can't get it done. Is this a step in that direction toward fulfilling that promise?
Well, it's certainly the gesture and appearance, the optic of trying to fulfill his promise. But remember that this president also promised that he wouldn't bring any of these detainees onto U.S. soil. This comes amid great skepticism among many of us who have been watching the maneuverings that have been going on in Illinois. You'll recall that over the last couple of years, there was this move to turn the Thompson Correctional Facility in Illinois at the behest of Dick Durbin, who was one of the chief opponents of Gitmo, into essentially Gitmo U.S. And there was a very little notice, DOJ notice, that was filed in the D.C. courts that essentially is going to allow this transfer to take place at some point. I think people need to be very wary and skeptical of that. And again, the context and the backdrop is very important. You'll note that this story came out very late on Friday night. The detainees, transnationalist lawyers were made aware of this new process by Pentagon officials late on Friday, and now it's all breaking. A lot of this has gone on behind the scenes. I think there's a lot of mollification of the far left that's going on. And remember that we still have these ongoing hunger strikes at Gitmo, which I call jihad theater, all a part of the large amount of pressure that's being put on the administration to fulfill that very reckless promise.
Yeah, and we've talked about a few of these individuals who may be in this group. Right now it sits at 71. The Defense Department says that could go up or down depending on how they, vet these individual cases. But what we understand is that this group contains prisoners considered too dangerous to release, but they don't have enough evidence to actually take them to trial. And that's been a real sticking point, on both sides of the aisle up in Washington, is why aren't these trials happening? I mean, if that could happen, could we make progress on a different front here?
Right. There was a court decision recently that acted as hamstringing of the tribunal process, that said that providing material support to terrorism did not qualify as a quote-unquote international war crime. So I think that that sort of froze some of the tribunal process. On the other hand, there's been a huge amount of foot-dragging on the part of the Obama administration and the Department of Social Justice in particular to not go ahead with the trials that could take place. And there has been no justice, for example, for the American families of the victims of the USS Cole bombing. They have not done anything on that front to prosecute the mastermind of the USS Cole bombing, who was one of the detainees there. And, of course, the entire circus around Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the masterminds of the 9/11 plot.
A lot remains to be done, and good of you to raise the USS Cole because, yeah, as you said, still some answers needed by those families and closure for those families, and we should not forget that or any of these other developments. No timeline for these so-called periodic review boards, but we'll keep an eye on it. Michelle, thank you.
You bet. Take care.